This policy exchange event. My name is Benjamin Barnard, and I am head of technology here at Policy Exchange. The tech sector is powering a new era of growth and providing the UK with a globally competitive edge. There's a lot said at Party Conference this year about going for growth, but if there's one sector to which going for growth really applies, it's the UK digital sector, which is now valued at $585 billion, which is 120% more than in 2017. So we have a tremendous opportunity to harness the power of disruptive and emerging technology to transform our productive potential, to improve our quality of life, and to increase consumer choice. But with the digital economy expanding at an enormous pace, regulatory questions exist, and there are all kinds of different elements as to how we can encourage that acceleration and keep it going for the future. And that's what really we hope we're going to discuss today. How can we build the skills, the regulatory environment, and encourage the investment to go for growth? Without further ado, I'm going to quickly introduce our panel. To my left, we have the Secretary of State for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and she's given a great speech yesterday, which I hope she's going to give us a sort of sneak kind of review of today as well. To her left, we have Katie O'Donovan, who is the Public Policy Director of a small online search company called Google. To her left, we have Air Marshal Edward Stringer, who, in addition to being a senior fellow at Policy Exchange, is a former Director General of the Joint Force Development and Defence Academy. So if there's anybody who knows about how to develop people with the skills and the digital skills for the future, it's Air Marshal Stringer. To my right, we have Oliver Lewis, who, in addition to being the UK's former Deputy Chief Brexit Negotiator, is actually at the moment running and creating his own tech startup focused on the biodiversity space. So very often at Conservative Conference, you hear these great discussions about startups, and there isn't a startup in the room. Let that not be said of Policy Exchange. And to his very, very, very far right, or to my very far right, we have...
It's the first time I've ever been called that.
It's a new era, comrade. We have the former Minister of State in DCMS, Matt Warren, but he's a sort of something of a rare beast in that he's actually got a whole career working in tech, because before this he was the technology editor at the Daily Telegraph. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to the Secretary of State. We had a great speech yesterday focused on GDPR reform, going for growth. What do you plan to do in your time in office, and how can we really power this sector in the future?
Yeah, thank you, and delighted to be here. I am in charge of a department which is front and central of the growth agenda. Often people call it the Ministry of Fun, which I can tell you I really, really hate, because it is anything but that. It hovers around 23-25% of the economy, of which a big chunk is digital, and the opportunities are really there. And if we are going to deliver on this growth target, and we're really going to push our country and our economy forward, DCMS is going to have to be pivotal in that, and the sectors that I represent. So I think what we need to do is we need to promote and sell our digital economy better, not just here, but obviously around the globe. Secondly, we need to be investing in digitech and AI. There's a real opportunity with AI for us to be leading the way internationally. And thirdly, we need to be cutting down on the regulation and the burden that is curtailing industry and is making those that are in the sector think twice about whether they locate or they grow here in the UK. So it's a similar theme to what we've been hearing in other sectors, really. This isn't rocket science, I would argue, and it's down to this government to get right and to deliver. I do think the digital economy is probably one of the unsung heroes of our economy. It doesn't get as much airtime or as much media attention as other areas of the economy, yet it is vitally important. In fact, this year, our tech sector hit a value of $1 trillion just for us. The United States and China have been the only ones that have matched and exceeded that. And yet most people don't know that, because the UK is one of the best places, if not the best places, to grow and start a tech business. And it will be even more so once we enact the digital strategy. And did you know that estimates suggest that we could grow the UK tech and digital sectors annual gross value by an additional 41.5 billion by 2025. Now that would be 678,000 jobs. Just imagine what it would mean for the British public across our country, what it would mean for my own constituents as well. It's a complete game changer, but nobody really talks about it. So I'm quite glad that we're doing so today, because it is crucial for the growth agenda. Of course, Germany and France, if we look at them, they're very good at talking up their own game and how good they are in this space. Yet we have double the digital economy that Germany does and 5 times the digital economy that France does. So it is a bit of the best kept secret, and I want, as my department and the ministers that I work, really to be banging that drum at every opportunity and supporting the sector to keep growing and to flourish. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning how we need to invest in AI, a real opportunity, I would say, for us to be the world leaders here and to be promoting the benefits to the society and the economy, but we're going to have to take the public with us. I've seen various stats and polls on this, I'm sure you have. One that I saw recently said that 37% of the British public wouldn't consider choosing AI tools and services that were available now, let alone the technology that can come on stream. So all these things are well and good, but we need to make sure we are taking people with us as we develop and we advance and we bust some of these myths and we capitalise on the opportunities in terms of jobs and growth here in the UK. And I think the question that we all need to ask today is, how many of these jobs do we want here in the UK? And if we want to corner the market, we're going to have to be serious about that, and we're going to have to punch above our weight as well as promote. And the other point is around regulation. I believe in common sense deregulation, unlocking business and creating the opportunities for them to flourish. And certainly I think that we can go further, and we should have already gone further, and that's something that this government will be correcting. And I will be leading this in my own area, the area I represent. As I said yesterday, if we look at GDPR, for instance, that's just one way that we've been curtailing businesses and making them adapt a one-size-fits-all approach when we don't need to do that. We can look across the globe and see that many, many other countries have their own version of data protection, and they can still achieve advocacy and trade with other nations, and we can still protect people's data privacy, and we can still support businesses to prevent them from being subject to cyber attacks, etc. But what we should be doing is applying common sense. It is not common sense to have a one-size-fits-all policy that is not risk-averse, and it is really strangling opportunities for growth. And that's just a bit of the flavour of what you'll be seeing coming out of my own department and the government over the coming months and coming years. And one thing is for sure is that you will notice there is a marked there's a marked change in terms of the speed at which policy and announcements will be made. There will be a drumbeat, a regular drumbeat of announcements coming outside, hitting the floor and making sure that we are delivering for people day in, day out, and that we're injecting those supply side reforms which go hand in hand with the growth agenda. It's not just about taxes, it's much, much more than that. And Tech UK surveyed digital companies and found 2 really interesting things that I thought, thank you, which was firstly that good regulation can be a driver. So we're not certainly saying scrap all regulation, but obviously contradictory regulation can curtail businesses. So we do have to get the balance right, and it's important that we've now got a government that's focused on this, and that we're co-designing everything with business. That was the theme I took to GDPR yesterday. I think it's the theme that we should be taking to everything. We shouldn't be dictating to business, to entrepreneurs, to tech startups what's in their interest. We should be listening to them and co-designing approaches and policies as we move forward. So when we ask, how can we boost the digital economy, what we need to do, really we need to reverse the question and ask the industry leaders, how can we do that? And that should be informing government's policy and approach rather than the other way around.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's fantastic and giving us huge food of thought for the rest of the panel. I'm going to turn now to Matt. Now, very briefly, just towards the tail end of the Johnson administration, you were plucked into government, which deprived us of the warm and independent review of the future of work. So I'd love to hear what your reflections were of looking into that and thinking it properly. And actually, we've heard quite a lot about regulation and deregulation. I was wondering what you thought the biggest regulatory burdens were facing UK tech companies, and how the government can adopt a sort of approach to the regulation of the digital economy without perhaps stymie innovation and growth, and more broadly how you balance objectives like data privacy, consumer protection, intellectual property, cybersecurity, which, and competition policy more generally, which are sometimes at cross purposes to each other.
Lovely. Thank you, and thank you for having me. There's quite a lot to get into there, isn't there? So I just to sort of go back a little bit, prior to the announcement of his intention to stand down, the Prime Minister asked me to do a review into what we called the future of work, which is an enormous topic that we broke down into themes around AI, skills, workers' rights, and what we called more generally place, which is a mixture of how has the workplace and the high street and everything in between changed as a result of people's increasing ability to work from home, but also what is it that we should be thinking about around the impact on flexible work that we saw over the pandemic and the completely changed attitude from both employers and employees to that. In the manifesto in 2019, the party had a right to request working from home, which at the time was criticised by people who were talking about this stuff pre-pandemic as essentially meaningless because it wasn't a sort of legal guarantee of the ability to do that and all that. And it was intentionally at the time a very light touch commitment. Fast forward post-pandemic, and we now know that very, very few businesses would ever say, no, you can't do any aspect of any job from home. We've all been through that experience, but we also know that there are very, very few employees who want to work from home all of the time because it drives people crackers. So actually an answer that was arguably the wrong policy in 2019, that some would say was too light touch, actually I would say, for instance, we've now learnt, albeit in very regrettable circumstances, that it is now the right answer for 2022, 2023 and beyond. So it's an interesting example of light touch regulation being validated through an extraordinary experiment. And I think that's to some extent in tune with what a lot of Michelle was just talking about, that light touch can be a much better way forward. Anyway, having the privilege of 3 months or so back in government unfortunately meant that I couldn't claim to be the independent reviewer, because I would literally have had to go and lobby myself occasionally, which I was looking forward to, but I can see why it was problematic. So where that review is now left is I completed what we were calling phase one, which was where we were narrowing down the scope of that, and to say the things that I think we can focus on sensibly are around what is a sort of liberalised workers' rights regime that acknowledges those different conditions, but also protects people who can't work from home in an appropriate way. And a huge number of the public services on which we all rely are powered by people who definitely can't work from home. You can do some bits of the NHS from home, but you certainly can't do the portering and the cleaning and all that. You certainly can't empty the bins working from home. There are some really key things that we have to balance there in a sensible and I think light touch way. And I'm conscious that I've probably already used up my 4 minutes, but I will try and draw things together simply by saying the reason I'm confident that we can take what is a light touch regulatory approach and a deregulatory approach is because the majority of the problems that DCMS looks at might see a new lens, but they are not new problems of themselves. So for instance, when we talk about AI being used in recruitment decisions, those recruitment decisions are not inherently new because there is an AI element being involved in that. So we can look to the principles that are long established across the regulatory environment and say, how does new technology get into those, and where are the gaps where you might need new or different regulation. But in the vast majority of cases, you can say this is a tool that is being used for a new purpose. There is no need to seek to reinvent the wheel. So that is hopefully what allows Michelle's department to go at breakneck speed, because we don't need to reinvent all of those wheels, which we all look forward to.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn now to Oliver. Oliver, it's great to have a sort of start-up voice in the room. But more broadly, until very recently, you were in Downing Street. We were coming out of the European Union. We're now out of the European Union. I know that tech and the digital economy was a real part of the vision for a UK growth outside of the EU. I just wondered what you thought, from your experience in government, what we can do to kind of really enhance that acceleration and make that vision a reality.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed, Ben. Thank you, everyone here as well. I'll come on to those points towards the end of my remarks, because Ben, when he asked me to speak, stated emphatically and repeatedly, concerningly so, that I only had 4 minutes to speak. So in the interest of brevity and focus, I'm going to split my remarks into 2 parts. Sort of paraphrasing John F. Kennedy, I want to talk a bit about what government can do for tech, but also what tech can do for the government, because one thing that I've realised in my time in Number 10 and also working at other parts of government, including local government and outposts like embassies, is that often there's a catastrophic failure of government to use tech in competent ways. The test is simply how often do you see officials using, for example, Microsoft Office 2003 and other things like that 10, 20 years old. And while the outcome of this is, yes, sometimes, yes, minister-esque amusement, often it also leads to genuinely problematic delays, money lost, and in the worst cases, actually deaths and injury because of a sclerotic approach to technology. I saw this firsthand when I was in Number 10 during 2020, when I was involved in a partial way in the shielding programme. For those who don't know, this was when, for 2.2 clinically extremely vulnerable people, we had to make sure that they were receiving food box and support directly from the state. And the problem statement that was given to us, so we had 72 hours basically to devise a system to make sure that we could identify people who needed support from the state and provide them with the care and support that they needed. Officials working extremely hard but limited by tools basically only come up with the idea of a phone bank without a phone number in order to try and help these people. Instead, we were able to bring in some extraordinary talented civil servants from across Whitehall, experts from outside, and in a massive tribute to the ability of both civil servants and external experts, we were able to build a system which basically replicated key functions of Amazon in under 72 hours, delivering all those food boxes and making sure we were able to deliver for those people. I think it's a real shame, it's a tragedy actually, that we haven't seen that kind of tech and that kind of approach being adopted more widely by government. We have an incredible tool in the form of gov.uk, which was for many years at the cutting edge of how states can interface with the citizen, allowing citizens to perform all kinds of activities online and get help from the government. Sadly, that process has really gone into sand. I think it's a tragedy that, for example, we've lost Jen Allen, who was up until recently the head of that project. I think it's also very, very sad to see that Number 10 is now getting rid of its data analytics unit. As far as I can see, the only outcome of that is that ministers and secretaries of state will have less data with which to make decisions. And I also think it's a very, very bad news to hear that the Cabinet Office is planning to end the use of Google tools, which is just going to allow productivity to fall through the floor. This is all bad stuff for the state, but it also has a deeper and bigger issue, in my opinion, which is it means that at the heart of government, there's a lack of understanding of what tech can do, what tech needs, and the potential of tech, which means that there is an inability to offer the kind of solutions that are going to allow tech to really flourish. We heard from the Secretary of State just now, correctly, what a huge and incredible opportunity we have compared to so many different countries. But we need to make sure that we have a proper understanding of the opportunity inside government. For example, I'm not necessarily convinced that the best way to motivate the development and innovative thinking of tech entrepreneurs is to necessarily get rid of 45p. I'm quite glad that the government's moved away from that and that didn't attract too much comment. But what I do think is a good idea, which was in the mini budget, was the increase of SEIS up to 250. That is a targeted intervention which tech entrepreneurs across the country utilise and is going to make a really genuine, meaningful difference. It'd be great to see Innovate UK be expanded, its remit expanded, and its ability to help new enterprises grow. It's also fantastic to see that the government is keeping ARIA, which is going to be leading the way in all kinds of technical development, scientific research, funding Fundamental science is the way to prompt the development of new tech, develop new skills. We've seen that in countries all over the world, in tech hubs all over the world. That can be an extraordinary driving engine. As Matt has said, we have seen the economy change dramatically over the last few years. The opportunities for the tech sector are massive. And I just want to round up my comments by coming back to what Ben said, which is talking about sort of the Vote Leave agenda, what we were trying to push in the referendum. I was director of research for the Vote Leave campaign. I wrote the manifesto for that campaign. Our philosophy was actually largely driven by a Greek statesman, Pericles, who, in his famous funerary speech, said that the aspiration he had for his homeland, for Athens, was for Athens to become the school of Greece. And by that, he didn't mean in education terms, he meant in terms of leading Greece in technology, art, science. It's an extraordinary, fascinating, and I think a highly compelling vision. And to us, we wanted to use the freedoms that would come from Brexit to turn Britain into the school of the world, to be the place where people would come to develop the new technologies, to where if you got rid of the EU's rules on procurement, precautionary principle, things like GDPR, which you've just heard about, there was a fascinating and exciting opportunity to take advantage of all the assets the Secretary of State just talked about and to make Britain the driving force, to be the place where you have the AI development which we have just discussed, to take advantage of, for example, the quantum computing cluster around Bristol and to the huge strides forward we made in battery technology. I think that the best thing, in short, that the government could do is to discover that kind of vision, to get utterly passionate about the idea of turning Britain into that vanguard of technical development. It can be done, it should be done, and that is the best way to promote the digital economy.
Brilliant. Thank you, Oliver. Some great rhetoric and a great vision there. I'm going to turn now to Katie at Google, because I think one of the things that's really going to drive this is the skills in the digital economy. You guys need people who are skilled at Google. You've also done a huge amount to sort of increase skills elsewhere in the economy. So I thought I'll throw that question open to you about skills more generally and what you think this disruptive sector needs more broadly.
Thank you so much, Benjamin, and thank you all for coming today. We're really pleased to be able to sponsor this panel. I'm really pleased actually to see the focus from the government and in the Secretary of State speech yesterday, which really understands and seeks to harness that tech can be a growth engine across the whole economy, and I think that's so important. Google has been in the UK for almost 20 years, and I think we really recognise some of those characteristics that do make Britain such a fantastic place to do business. We have wonderful R&D institutions, we have fantastic educational institutions, we have businesses that are really quick to harness technology, even prior to the pandemic. So we've been here for almost 20 years, grown our footprint to about 7,000 staff, moving up to 10,000, and opening our first ever purpose-built building outside of the US. We've got fantastic R&D colleagues based here, whether it's Google themselves or our Waymo driverless cars and DeepMind, who many of you will know. But you're right, Benjamin, we do think a lot about skills, because I think if you're trying to answer that question, and this was put really well to me yesterday by a government advisor, how does every department become a growth department? You have to start, I think, with thinking about skills. And a company like ours, our mission is to make the world's information universally available. So if we just see pockets of tech being harnessed, but that doesn't proliferate across the economy or across citizens, we're not fulfilling our mission. So we also know it will drive really good, vital economic growth. So actually the government themselves found that there's 30% of vacancies are due in part down to digital skills. This contributes to about £63 billion in lost GDP. And so for that, to fulfill our mission to help drive that economic growth, about 7 or 8 years ago, and actually the second one we ever opened, we launched a program called the Digital Garage. We launched the second one in Birmingham Library with, I think, Sajid Javid was the business minister at the time. And this program seeks to help people, whether they're individuals, whether they're small businesses, whether they want to grow their career or business or develop new skills, get the digital skills that they need for free. Over those years, we've trained 800,000 people. We've been in cities and towns across the UK. We obviously pivoted online during the pandemic. We're slowly coming back into real-life learning. You might have seen a campaign that we're running at the moment with Ian Wright, which is about skills on the go, because one of the pieces of research we did identified that actually time is the biggest barrier for people to develop those digital skills. They know that that will help them grow their business or career, but they don't have the time. So we now offer everything from, if you're waiting, we didn't use this as an advertising thing, but if you're waiting for your panel to start at Conservative Conference, you've got 15 minutes worth of digital skills, or you're on the bus ride commuting home. And that goes right through our skills offer then to a level 4 equivalent qualifications in user design and highly technical skills that we've partnered with DWP. So we're on the DCMS's Skills Council, which we're really pleased to be on. And I think there's a wonderful opportunity for the government to convene the businesses on that council, but actually the organisations beyond, and really make this a generational push. We've gone through Brexit. We now have a different UK with a different regulatory system, and we can look to really harness that. Second thing I just wanted to touch on as well, so I think digital skills has to be a really central pillar of any plan for growth. The second one is infrastructure. We do have some fantastic resources here in the UK. I actually want to share a bit of research that Amazon Web Services did, which I hope they don't mind. But they looked at actually the use of cloud computing and the ability for it to contribute to productivity across businesses. And they found about half of businesses in London use cloud computing, but that number is really different across the region. So in the East Midlands, it's only 25%. And if they raised, or we collectively raised, the use of cloud computing in the North East, it would add 2.6% to the productivity of Newcastle, which is equivalent to 3 years' pay rise. So I think thinking about how we encourage businesses to harness technology is really important too. And the Treasury obviously have done a lot through Help to Grow, but I think there's some really important lessons to learn from that. We're also thinking about if it's right for there to be a UK research cloud, which is building from an example in the US, where actually academia, big and small think tanks, big and small businesses would have access to shared UK research cloud, pointed to the right and the best data centres to make that available. So I think there's fantastic opportunities in the UK. We're really proud to be part of the economy, contributes about 50 billion through the businesses that use us, and also partner to government as they really focus on the opportunity of digital growth.
Brilliant, fantastic. And I'm going to turn quickly to Ed to mop up what you thought, the key salient points from that work, and what you think, with perhaps slightly more sort of resilience hat on, we can learn from the last few periods and the last few years about digital and its role in the economy.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and thank you all for coming. I've just been ticking off all the points I was going to make. So I've decided to adopt the Jack and Ori approach and tell some stories, because everybody likes stories at this end of the day, and they all have a point to them. Back in 2018, Gavin Williamson found 500 million quid. That's £500 million when you're Secretary of State for Defence, for a transformation fund. Put it out to the services. Defence is transforming. We're going to go digital. 80% of the bids from the services were loosely what you might call modernisation. They wanted to spend money on the today. So there's a psychological point. Park that for the here and now. 20% genuinely transformational. Government found it really hard to spend the money. I've been working with a company called Improbable. Some of you will know who they are. Founded Herman Arula, sort of best computer science degree of his generation from Cambridge. Set up a really innovative company looking at emulators, synthetic worlds, digital twins. Does that mean things here? You all know about how Tesco's can predict what you're going to spend and you don't know it yourself. Well, imagine that to the nth degree, where you model everything from mapping, critical national infrastructure, social media, people's behaviour, space. And of course, it being a defence project, we wanted to model it around the front line with Russia and model how Russia might behave. Quite prescient, I thought, actually. So we picked on a country whose ambassador might be in this tent. I'll get you all looking around, I'm pretty sure. And it worked. But the problem was, it was very hard to get it off the ground. And we only wanted to put 12 million in, and the company was going to match fund it by 12 million. And the very good civil servant, you've mentioned Ollie, very good civil servant, a genuinely very good civil servant, finally signed it off. But his words, and I remember them almost, I can almost quote them verbatim. He said, Ed, I know this is just the sort of thing we need to be investing in, but I won't lie, I found it really hard to sign this off and sign this bit of paper, because it went against all the tenets of the sort of things you can invest in, because there's no track record for this technology. There's no track record for this startup company. And in the end, I had to write a spec that said, we're doing this because the Chinese are trying to do it as well. And if they get ahead of us, we'll be in that. So I wrote it to be a failure. I said, let's test it so we can demonstrate it can't be done, and then we'll have found something out. And if it can, we've got something useful, and we have. In the early days, what was it trying to model? Well, actually, pandemics, how they flow through big continents like Africa, that's quite simple. So when our own pandemic came on, we thought, great, let's offer this technology up. And back to your point about the Cabinet Office and where it was at the time. Ed, can you get it in 24 hours? Because we're going to make a decision in 48 hours. This is sort of week one of the pandemic and the lockdown. 3 companies, really good companies, Adaga, Digital, Improbable, all got together. We wrote a spec overnight. By 8:30 in the morning, had a full, low-risk spec in with the Cabinet Office. 48 hours to make a decision. 7 weeks later, how long? 48 hours to make a decision. Anybody in this room want to bet on whether that decision has been made yet? By that stage, all 28 government departments' chief scientific advisors felt they had an in and wanted to decide whether they were going to get involved. We're not very good. The point here is that buying software is a capability. Companies are moving from CapEx to OpEx in how they procure such stuff and moving quickly. How many of you have Apple laptops? Do you have a contract with Apple for the patch or being updated or keeping on top of your software when you bought for about whatever, $11.99, your hardware? Do you have a contract for the patch? I bet you don't. You bought the hardware and it will come. And we all have this psychological contract with Apple because they want to deliver a good product, or you might go buy someone else's, and you need the safety and security. If it was government, the way we buy aircraft carriers, we'd want to know exactly which month, what's going to be in the update, what it's going to solve, and you can't know that. So actually we're always behind the drag curve. You talked about very good civil servants knowing what's going on, good military people, I accept that. I've sat in rooms like this with industry where very, very, very senior people from the intelligence agencies, from the MOD, have listened to startups who know what they're talking about, trying to explain this simply, giving up days of their time, and at the end of it they hear, well, I'm a humanities graduate, so I'll leave all that techie stuff to Ed. It's not really good enough. But of course, government, I think it's about 83% of the fast-track civil service have humanities degrees. They don't really understand all of this stuff. And the dynamics of Whitehall silos departments to work individually. So just imagine this tech, if we were used to sharing data, imagine that the data that the NHS has on all of us, if we could suitably anonymise that and build a trust across the population, link that to the local government data, link that to social security data, just think of the targeted interventions. How much money would we save? How much more effective would the NHS be? So I think the big thing for government here is to be working on this sort of trust-risk balance as well. So I think the two things, if I sum all that up, and where I think a sort of task force approach, dare I say it, a vaccine task force approach for government, would be, on the one hand, to really work with startups and say, how do we procure software-driven capabilities while also going to the population and saying cost of living crisis, health crisis, if you really want to be more effective, let us use your data suitably anonymised, trust us, and we can all be in a damn sight better. So those would be, I think, the two things I would throw there in at the end. Think through how you work with tech startups so government can become digital, and in doing that, government can take some of the risk, like we did with the 12 million. It can prime the pump with some of these companies, and it can itself be a sponsor that keeps us, as you quite rightly said, Minister, at the cutting edge of the digital technology industry across Europe. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ed. There's so much to chew on there, from sort of Pericles of Greece to quantum computing. So I just really want to have this opportunity to open it up to questions from the floor. People could raise their hands so we could sort of see appetite for it. So we're going to do them in batches of 3, if that's possible. So if we come to the gentleman in the blue tie, we have 2 house rules with questions at Policy Exchange. First, you need to state your name and organisation, and secondly, it's a question, not an opportunity to provide another point from the floor, and I will ruthlessly cut people off. Sir, if I could go to you.
I'm thinking about sitting back down now. Patrick Melia, I'm Chief Exec of Sunderland City Council. We've got a great ambition to be the UK's smartest city, so I've really enjoyed the panel. A lot of what you've said makes a lot of sense. We've recently just done a 5G accelerator for businesses. We had huge numbers of applications, so really important. I suppose what I'm really interested in terms of, just before I ask the question, we're doing a lot.
I'm going to really push you. I'm so sorry. We've got a lot to get through.
We're doing a lot of work in terms of use cases. So we're putting 5G test bed in our university. We've just done 5G trials with Nissan and other things. What I'm really intrigued with is our investment zones. So Sunderland's got an opportunity to apply for investment zones. We will work with businesses. But I'm just
What's your
thinking
question,
around
sir? I'm so sorry.
How do we use the investment zone opportunities to grow our digital sector, but make a real difference in automotive, housing, education, etc. as well? And I think there's a real opportunity through the investment zones to do that.
Brilliant, thank you. Investment zones, how can they be used properly? So if we come to you next, the gentleman in the pink shirt.
Philip Merry, I'm a member of the party in the Northwest. Talking about building that level of trust for people to kind of consent to their data being used, for government to act smarter and better, how do we think that the government can kind of build that trust with people to be able to get them into a position where they would consent to that?
Brilliant, thank you. How do we build trust? And I'm going to go across to the gentleman with the glasses there.
Hi, Joe Reeve. I run Tory Techs, which is a community of technologists that care about politics and want to help improve policy decisions. Politicians don't trust technologists. You see that with the online safety bill. We say, we can't do this, and politicians say, well, you're just saying that because you don't want to be regulated. There are so many questions we genuinely can't answer. I think we probably shouldn't be doing some of the stuff we're doing. How can we build that relationship, that trust relationship between technologists and politicians?
Brilliant. That's a really, really great question. I'm going to throw those firstly to Michelle, but I'm just quickly add something. Then there's a sort of slight tension, isn't there, between the government on the one hand saying, let's go for growth, and the other hand introducing an online safety bill. It's already had one day at committee stage in the Lords that I think is quite heavy-handed when it comes to regulation. So I'll just sort of throw that there as a sort of mild challenge and see where we go.
Look, I don't agree. You know, this government is going to be the boldest Conservative government in a generation. And certainly we're going to make difficult decisions, and we are anti-regulation, but we're not going to be ideologically blind to the issue. You know, if there is a market that is failing, and it is not, in this case, prioritising the needs of children first, then I think we should intervene. I think we have a moral imperative to do so. And the inquest of Morley Russell highlighted that even more for anybody that's sceptical of that fact. And that proved the fact that if the social media platform had actually been adhering to their own terms and conditions, then that content wouldn't have been fed to a young girl that was in a vulnerable position. And I think that is wrong. And if they fail to get their own house in order, then we're going to have to step in. For me, the bill needs to be refocused on really putting children first and being about children, and making sure that they have the protections and safeguards in place. But we need to rebalance that for adults. I completely agree. We shouldn't be getting into a regulatory space as far as we've gone when it comes to adults, because what we should be prioritising is free speech and freedom of expression, which is one of the cornerstones of our democracy. And it's a very dangerous stepping stone when we forget that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn next to Matt and sort of see what we have questions about skills, investment zones. How can the government get this stuff to work properly?
Yeah, so I mean, I think investment zones is a really interesting example. There was some really interesting work done with the test beds and trials programme, that, as you know, but in lots of other places that I think we can build on. It's not immediately clear yet, simply because the government hasn't talked about what it would look like, how you could incentivise that sort of thing. But for instance, in Liverpool, where they built a 5G network primarily for social care, they've put 5G transceivers on pretty much everything they can find within a given area. That you can imagine deregulating some of the planning stuff around that. It would allow you to go that little bit faster. Likewise, I would hope that you could at least trial some of those proposals around data sharing that Michelle has alluded to in some of the investment zones, maybe. But I'm sure the government has a comprehensive plan that it will unveil at any moment on what that looks like, and I really hope that digital is a huge part of investment zones, because at the moment we've talked about them as though they are about reviving manufacturing and that sort of thing, which is a good of itself, but that digital economy, as Michelle said, plays such a huge and growing part. It would be daft not to be involved. Couple of questions separately about trust, and I think I'm quite torn on this, because on the one hand you do need a robust regulatory regime that provides the foundation for people to innovate. That's a given. But at the same time, we know that when we look at data sharing in the health service, for instance, at the moment, people expect their surgeon to be able to see the data that their GP can see, and they simply can't. I sort of struggle to see how you get to a just do it, because we know that there is sort of broad-based consent versus breaking things. And I think to some extent we have to be a little bit bolder, and I'm encouraged by what Michelle has said on some of this stuff. We have to be a little bit bolder about having the courage to build great products in exactly the same way that Google did with Street View, for instance, where people said this is going to be awful, it will ruin the privacy of the whole country. It turns out to be incredibly useful and no one really cares. And they've built out a sensible way of opting out if you are one of the small number of people that cares. I think government can try and adopt a slightly more robust approach on some of that without feeling that it has to undermine really important protections.
Brilliant. Oliver, I'm going to turn to you next.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've very quickly taken them in turn. In terms of the investment zones, I mean, I'm slightly cautious on this because I think if you look around various parallels around the world and throughout history, not always successful initiatives. Sometimes they just divert, businesses around rather than necessarily generating dynamic growth. If you look at some lessons where they have been very successful, I'm thinking particularly like Shenzhen, places like Deng Xiaoping released in sort of 1980s. What you found was they actually leaned into existing industries and where there were specialisms, etc., and local leaders were able to really find specific changes which made a massive difference. So I would bring back to the point I made earlier about the fact we have some exciting clusters in certain areas, so quantum computing in Bristol or whatever. The ability to actually engage quite seriously with experts in these areas, tech entrepreneurs, established players, universities, etc., and work out what are a set of highly specific things that would make a massive disproportional difference, I think would be, seems to be the delineation between success and failure in these kind of projects. In terms of building trust with people, I completely agree that, often it's the edge case in the question of people who have, I want to read all 50,000 words in that, privacy policy statement, etc. Gov.uk did some extraordinarily good work over many years in terms of looking at how people interact with the website, what gets people through, what they're willing to click through, etc. Again, it's a tragedy that we've lost some of the key civil servants who were driving that process over the last couple of years. It's just continuing to work on that kind of project, working out what kind of interactions, etc., do people feel comfortable with. And just very quickly, on the point about internal data sharing, I completely agree. People do want to have a service which allows you to, if you've entered in data for one service, a surgeon or the like, to be able to access it later on. The amount of horror that you get, though, in terms of lawyers screaming inside government and throwing paper at you, it's extraordinary. That is a very big issue that you need to challenge. It comes up to the point what Joe was raising as well about, trust between tech and regulators. But I mean, I'd be very, my view is, having done a startup in the sort of tech compliant, regulatory compliance space, we found that actually leaning into regulation seems to placated certain concerns, and the point is that we're not looking to evade regulation. If anything, we're looking to make it work and explaining here are some issues and deficiencies, etc. You can have meaningful conversations there. But in terms, there's a broader project, which is how do you make government feel comfortable with this? And, the former Vote Leave guys going to go Vote Leave here. The issue is you've got to address the legacy of EU law, because all sorts of very bad axioms, in my view, were introduced here in terms of extreme emphasis beyond all else on citizen privacy, precaution principle, technology is bad, innovation is bad. Basically, a whole bunch of principles that were designed to screw up American companies. They permeate throughout layers and layers of the civil service and government, etc. That drives a lot of blockages. And if you really want to unleash growth, a hellish, but in my view, long overdue and necessary project is to deal with those axiomatic concepts, which are, in my opinion, very bad.
Brilliant. I'm actually going to quickly open this up to some more questions so that we can get everyone in. I'm going to turn then to Katie and to Ed, so if people have got particular questions for them. So we'll start with the gentleman in the red trousers, and then we'll go back to the gentleman in the...
Thanks. Louis Coiffet-Gunn from the Publishers Association. The Digital Markets Unit was set up years ago as a kind of world-leading way of regulating these giant tech companies so that UK businesses can compete fairly. It's been in a kind of shadow form since then. In the meantime, the EU has established the Digital Markets Act and is setting the terms for regulation of these big firms. It was good to hear you've got lots of bills coming, Secretary of State. Will the DMU be put on a statutory footing?
Brilliant, fantastic. And was that the same question? Oh. Fantastic. And if we come to the gentleman on the front row here, and then we'll go to the lady just behind him.
Thank you very much. My name's Ian Bastable. I'm a councillor on the South Coast, and I spent a lifetime in technology, changed the way everybody was entertained and informed by inventing Sky Plus so you could record TV. My question was heresy. I put this in 2019, actually, and I think it's time to say it again, and it is targeted on the two people on the end, because I think you might go with this. I was surprised at your comments earlier. Shouldn't we be changing our regulatory environment with GDPR now, and with your new work you say you're going to do, so that it's not possible to monetize the data lake, but actually monetize the algorithms and have an open publishing of the data, so long as we have consent, and actually only allow people to make money out of what they do with that data rather than hoard it?
Brilliant. And if we go to the gentleman just there.
Thank you. Viljar Lubi, Estonian ambassador.
The Estonian ambassador, did you say?
Estonian ambassador. So I have a question. What Ed Stringer also said before, working for the government, I know very well that in the government usually everything is equally important. So prioritizing usually becomes an issue. So if I may ask maybe the secretary and also the others who want to comment, what would be, let's say, 2, maximum 3 KPIs that you think we should follow over the next 4 to 5 years to see if we have succeeded in digitalizing our economy or not?
Brilliant, that's fantastic. And if we could just go very quickly to the lady in the white.
Hi there, Mariella Brown from the Advertising Association. So I'm interested in the idea that you want to work with businesses to co-design regulation. Where does the government sit with self-regulation at the moment? We've got the online advertising programme, and that sets out 3 approaches, one with which may be a sort of existential threat to the ASA. Just sort of interested to know whether the government's interested in empowering our self-regulatory system in terms of advertising and online markets. Thank you.
Brilliant, fantastic. Well, I'm very keen to get Ed and Katie in, but I'm going to quickly turn to the Secretary of State. So, digital markets, we've got a bill potentially coming. There's also wider questions, perhaps, between tension between DCMS and BEIS. Certainly that's existed historically. It's quite early days. It'd be great to hear your thoughts on that and some of the wider questions.
No tension at all. Jacob and I get on very well. No, I mean, the only way that this government is going to succeed is by working as a team, so I'll be working very closely with Jacob because there's a lot of crossover in all of our work. That bill is certainly still alive and kicking, and we will be bringing it forward this Parliament. I can't give you the exact date today. And then on the data point, I think we can be smarter in the way that we monetize data. In fact, some commentators say it's worth more than the oil sector. So it is an untapped money tree, potentially.
Brilliant, fantastic. I'm now going to come across to Katie and Ed. But first with Katie, what do you think of the numerous questions we've had so far? And I wondered whether any particularly caught your ear.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think I want to come back a little bit to that point about trust and how we build trust, whether it's between users and platforms, or whether it's between technologists and government. And I think that's a really interesting one, and sometimes, prevents people from being as kind of expansive or as hopeful as what you can be around technology. I think for a company like ours, it's also totally incumbent on us to keep that trust with our users. If you think about something like a search engine, you can move very quickly to another search engine. We don't keep your photos or your information. You can, pivot to the search engine that works or the search engine that you trust. So I think it's absolutely inherent to the way we work to build that trust and to keep it with our users. And there's some really practical things that we do. So, for example, you can see really quickly in a thing we call My Account what data we do keep, how do we use it, what data you want to remove. You can take all of your data out if you want to, or you can kind of calibrate how we use that data if you want to use some of it. And, for example, have geo-specific adverts when you type pizza restaurant, but you don't want people to understand more about that than you. So I think it's something that all of us in the tech sector need to think really, really carefully about. I think the question about kind of whether we keep data open and do that or monetize the algorithm, I'm still processing in my head, if I'm totally honest, but I think I wanted to just flag that we do have a takeout policy that's actually relatively easy to use and gives people that choice of how much A, they share with us in the first place. So you don't need a Google account to use Google, and then B, what people do with data. And I think I don't think this was the question you're asking, but I think it's a relevant point. On something like YouTube, where we use algorithms really successfully to help people find new content that's relevant to them or to do that, we also then share the revenue that we make with the creators. So that's something that's pretty unique in the digital space, but I think really important. And sometimes when we talk about algorithms, it's the kind of, the worry that we think about. But actually, if you're studying chemistry or you're interested in Spanish guitar music or you're trying to fix your dishwasher, those algorithms really help you find the content that you need. And then just my very final point, I wanted to say, actually, I think the NHS do some tech really well. I think the NHS app is good, and if not, world leading. But I think we must encourage government to build things, because if they're not there, people start using their own fixes. And the last thing you want is someone texting somebody's medical records, because there's not a system in place to do that. And users will just, create their own fixes if the structural design isn't there. So I think there's great history, actually, of innovation in the UK, but we need to do more of it.
Brilliant, Ed. I'm going to come to you, and in particular, focus perhaps on the Estonian ambassador's question about the specific KPIs where you think we can go.
I'm very glad His Excellency Villiers is here, because one of my answers to the trust question was going to be go and look at what they've done in Estonia, and then never waste a crisis, because of course Estonia accelerated after 2007, the massive cyber attack by Russia. It does incredibly interesting things with data that we haven't got time to go into now, but I'm going to link to the question then about who owns the data. And one of the stories I didn't say earlier on for time involves one of our leading professors in the country in artificial intelligence, international renowned expert on it, who at one of those sessions where he was rather cuffed off with, I'm a humanities graduate, he made the point that one of the problems is you just can't get hold of government data, so you can't train your AI, you can't work on it. And then government says help us, but isn't giving the raw material so that the help can come forward. So that would be one of those areas I would think, the Vaccine Task Force for Digital would have a look at that and set some policies that would encourage the market here, would encourage UK tech. The crisis here is the cost of living crisis and possibly a health crisis recovering from the NHS. So the trust element there, as I say, go to see what they've done in Estonia, but also someone mentioned the use cases that you have got. If you can demonstrate use cases and you can say to people, do you want your elderly relatives to be better or do you want them dead? Oh, and by the way, here's a wage packet, and you might invest in a region that might go for it, and then people would turn around and go, why are they living longer in Sunderland? Which they've not said for a long time, but they might say, why are they living longer in Sunderland? And so set that almost competitive game going. And the final thing on this is, I really want to pick up on this idea of the you mentioned Amazon Web Services and the idea of a park. I did sort of test flying a few years ago when I was a bit younger and less grey, and government sponsored a lot of that test flying at Boscombe Down. Some of you will know it, where government and private industry came together. Most of what I was doing then wasn't actually swanky aeroplanes. It was the early days of digital and how digital technologies in old aeroplanes could make them a heck of a lot better. We would work with coders in the afternoon and go and fly the product in the morning for reasons I can't really go into here, but actually the particular relationship we had between the Air Force and coders meant we could move really quickly. That thing I did with Improbable, talk about building trust and allowing ministers to understand, was all done because I put end users on the coding floor of Improbable. We didn't have, I'm writing a spec, you will go away and deliver it, 6 months later you'll come back, we'll say that's not good enough. You have people working together. And then Adam, your old boss's successor, would come down and could get hands on field. The minister could come down to Improbable and get, oh, I understand, I see what's going on now. So you can work closer together. So on that science park, I think through, where is the digital version of that Boscombe Down airfield that kept us at the cutting edge of aerospace? Where is the government's digital Boscombe Down? Because that could be really at the cutting edge of the digital socio-economy for the future.
Brilliant, fantastic. We've got 5 minutes left, and I know the Secretary of State has an absolutely packed diary. So I'm going to go around the panel now and ask them to summarise, perhaps in 60 seconds, what they thought the key things we can do to support the UK digital economy are, and what their biggest takeaways from the session are. So I'm going to start with Matt, if that's okay, at the end of the panel, and work our way down.
So I think the two things that I would say is don't reinvent the wheel, because digital is more often than not a tool rather than a revolution. And second, which amazingly we haven't really talked about today, it all comes back to skills. None of this will happen if we're not training the right people in the right way, starting at school, carrying on through university, and doing that in a way that dovetails with the needs of business, primarily, to some extent government. And the more we can focus on that skills agenda and look internationally in a sensible and liberal way for people that have those unique skills, then that will, I think, be the thing that supercharges the digital economy.
Brilliant, fantastic. And turning to Oliver next.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the takeaways are, obviously there's a gigantic opportunity, has been said right at the very start, in terms of the number of sectors, the amount of capital in the UK, and the amount of opportunity. There's a huge amount of goodwill. No one doubts that everyone in government at all levels wants this to work. But there's also a massive challenge, and that is a challenge that ranges from the legal framework that we currently have all the way through to the culture and the approaches of the system and the ability to get things done. Unless we are prepared to actually tackle these really complicated, boring challenges in terms of how you deal with internal inertia and bureaucracy, it's very possible that we're going to miss this golden opportunity, which would be an absolute tragedy. And I guess what I would compel and ask people to do is to carry on engaging, try to break down those barriers, explain how technology can make government work better, build that sort of trust, and in return we could hopefully find the kind of policies and very specific interventions which can unleash this extraordinary opportunity.
I'm going to come to the Minister last, so we'll go to you next, Ed.
3 points. We are in the middle of a science technology race with powers like China that we have not faced for probably about 300 odd years. Therefore, this stuff is absolutely vital. The second for government is to think through how it contracts with the tech industry, so how it procures software-driven capabilities, fundamentally different way of thinking about it. That would unlock a heck of a lot. The third, education and skills, and government can think about how it would educate its own workforce to begin with. And a small plug for my old outfit, the Defence Cyber School down at Shrivenham, because we started doing it.
Brilliant, thank you. And Katie?
I think if we go back to the quote at the beginning of Athens being the school of Greece, then we have to focus on digital skills, and I think that's incumbent on all of us, government, industry, academia, to play our part. So I'm really excited about the opportunities there. I think what was really interesting is that none of us answered the question about what are the 2 to 3 KPIs that measure success, and I think there's fantastic agreement, fantastic opportunity here, but maybe that's something we do need to spend some time thinking about quite quickly, and I think we should frame those in what gives the UK the most competitive advantage. Part of my job is explaining to Google why they need to invest more and do more in the UK. Sometimes that's really easy, sometimes it's more complicated. So let's create those KPIs that drive more and more inward investment.
Brilliant, fantastic. I'm going to turn to Secretary of State to summarise.
So, the 3 things. First thing I think is collaboration. We've heard a lot today about task force and working with et cetera, and that's the approach that I took in education. I think it's the correct approach to deliver and to get things done with speed, and that's the approach I'll be taking in this department, working with the digital and tech industry. The second point, skills, was referenced. Obviously, I'm passionate about skills with my previous work that I've done, and it is going to be absolutely essential if we are going to turbocharge our digital economy here, and we really need to fill those skills gaps quickly. And then the third thing, I think it boils down to the government needs to be proactive rather than reactive. It's as simple as that. So when we look at things like 5G, we've been following the rest of the world, whereas with 6G, we have the opportunity to lead the world. We need to get ahead of the curve on many of these things, working hand in hand with industry.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, look, it's been an amazing panel. We've covered everything from the Digital Markets Act through to online safety and through to the sort of cutting edge of SEIS investment. But it's fantastic to know that there's this agenda right at the heart of Conservative Conference. And despite the change of government, it's being put forward. So I'd like to thank everybody in the audience for giving up their time today. I'd like to thank the Minister of State for appearing just 2 weeks into her job. And it has to be said, we're 2 very busy weeks for the Secretary of State dealing with London Bridge and the death of Her Majesty the Queen. And it's particularly lovely for all of those watching at home. So thank you for coming, thank you to the Secretary of State, and thank you to Google for sponsoring. Thank you very much.